visiting this zoo, this was the sound we were met with. And somehow, almost every tour I do, weather has been bad. All of that driving us into the aquarium and terrarium building. Not directly a bad thing, as I am a reptile keeper at heart, and Zoo Zurich, the zoo we are visiting today, sure has a very nice terrarium section. Although this section is not very big, there were certainly a few features I really liked. First off, the semi-transparent roof, making sure there's plenty of natural light all over the section and the enclosures. A stark contrast to the typical dark reptile and aquarium sections of most zoos. Also, the amount of plants everywhere, both in and outside the enclosures. You walked underneath a canopy of ferns and other epiphytic plants, which was really cool, and also this created a bit less of a divide between the terrariums and the actual walkways. Every enclosure was well lit, clean, not overstocked, and highly planted, and most animals had plenty of space. For example, the tree monitors, which had some of the bigger enclosures I have seen for this species in any zoo. Also, the species selection was very interesting. For instance, they had a very nice selection of Phelsuma, which I can imagine is a great display animal because of their day-active nature. They also had a few more rare species, like the tiger chameleon, which is endemic to the Seychelles Islands. I know most people come to Zurich for the Masoala Halle, and with good reason, it was really impressive. But if you're there anyway, why not also visit this section, which is located a level above the aquarium section. Speaking of the aquarium section, I don't have many images of that area simply because it was very dark and not directly something new to see. The best part of this section was without a doubt the big paludarium style enclosure, where one part was for a single stunning looking snakehead. And the other section was for brackish water species, including mangrove, mud skippers, some monos, and this enclosure also had a tide system which raised and lowered the water level, which was a cool feature. Now let's move on to the probably biggest attraction of this zoo and maybe the reason you are actually watching this video. Walking through a corridor into the hall, slowly looking up, you get a first sense of the height and size of this impressive tropical greenhouse. The trees are tall, obviously matured. And at first glance, you really got to take your time and look closely to see the first animals hiding between the dense vegetation. If you want to get a real sense of the scale of this hall, you have to go up onto the walkway in between the trees. If you walk all the way up and go to the highest point, you are met with a view over the canopy of this indoor forest. Here you get a real sense of the size of this tropical hall, which is, although loosely, based on Madagascar. On top of this tower, you get the first real introduction to this team, and that is thanks to the Phelsma madagascariensis, which you can find all over this tower. These Phelsma were not shy at all, and they didn't even get bothered by a whole bunch of children running around on the tower, so that was fun to see. A lot of people don't really notice them until they see you looking at the Phelsma, so a lot of these animals just move about without anybody noticing them, which is pretty funny. So when one thinks of Madagascar, one of the first things we think about, at least when it comes to animals in zoos, is lemurs. And of course there were also several species living in this hall. And as you can see, these lemurs were not afraid of heights, because they were up there really high into the canopy of this hallway, which was pretty impressive to see. We spent quite some time on this tower, and from here you get a viewpoint of some of the birds. Of course there was a hanging basket where you could see the pigeons feeding, but there were also finches, some bee eaters, and there were these wonderful Vasa parrots. Back down, there's only one path which leads you along the hall, and there are a few more pathways, but these you can only enter if you're on a guided tour. When you walk along the hall, you do spot some more animals. With the Phelsma being the most prolific, you see them almost everywhere once you know where to look. And another reptile that was free roaming here was the panther chameleon, like this wonderful looking male. There should also be Europlatus hiding in between these leaves, but those were very hard to find. And the same goes for the pygmy lemurs, of which there's actually a very big group living in this hall, but of course during the day you probably won't see them. I certainly enjoyed walking along this hall. It does not have the same vibe as, for instance, Burg's Bush, but still it was really impressive. They had a few cool species and it was really mature. I did wonder what else there was to see, because again there were a few paths we weren't able to take. I feel like if we had that opportunity, there was definitely a whole lot more to see. The species selection was also very interesting, because most of the big tropical halls are either based on Amazonia or maybe Asia, but in this case they chose for the whole hall to be based on Madagascar. And the reason I say it is loosely based on Madagascar is simply because, of course most species come from Malagasy, and I can understand that the Aldabras, the Seychelles are pretty close to Madagascar, But they also had a lot of West African plants. And the jacanas that walked around were actually the Amazonian species, probably filling up the niche that normally the Malagasy species would. Anyway, great haul. If you're there, definitely go there. It is really impressive. But for now, it was time for us to go back outside. And the weather did not allow us to make great videos of most of the park. And there was also a lot of construction. But as you can see, this outdoor savanna was really big. So if the weather would have been a bit better and all the animals walked outside, I'm sure that would have been really impressive and cool to see. Luckily for us, there were a few more big halls we could visit, including one with African animals. These are reticulated giraffes. And I really like this species, it just looks really cool. They have a really stark contrast, nice coloration, and although the space they were living in wasn't too big, they have access to a whole savanna, and I did not see any forms of stress or stereotypical behavior, so that was really nice. They also had a very nice group of southern white rhinos, but this is a species you will see in more of our zoo tours, so we're not gonna spend a lot of time in this section. If you walk outside the African building, you step into this very nice aviary with African grey parrots. This once was, and maybe still is, a very popular pet parrot, which unfortunately now is highly endangered and protected by CITES. And although the species is still kept in quite high numbers, the reproduction in captivity is actually quite low. So I'm very curious how the animals do in this nice big aviary in such a big group. Besides the African Hall, you will find the house. Again, one of the bigger attractions of this park. And here, of course, what draws your attention are these nice Asian elephants, but certainly also the architecture of this impressive building. To get back to the reptiles, we visited the Galapagos tortoises, a species this zoo is very successful with, and there were also some youngsters on display. Now, due to the weather, all animals were indoors in this what seemed to be a bit older building with the typical concrete flat floor, but when weather permitted, they also had access to a very nice outdoor pasture with some hills, so the animals could get a bit more of an exercise. I do have to say that they did their best to make this a bit nicer looking setup with the nice rock walls and a lot of foliage again on the top. You creating not only a safe and secure feeling for the tortoises, but it also just looked a little bit better. This video covers about 50% of what there is to see in this beautiful zoo. Simply because we were a bit limited on time, the weather conditions weren't that great, and during this period there was a lot of construction all over the park. They are working on some really big and interesting projects. For what I have seen, I don't directly think the collection is the reason to visit the zoo, as except for some species, most can be found in other zoos and parks. But the presentation, architecture of some buildings, and simply the impressive size of a lot of the buildings, at least the newer buildings and enclosures, are really interesting to see. So for those who enjoy visiting a zoo with interesting buildings, impressive buildings and a nice selection of animals, this is a great place to spend the day. Just make sure that you bring your own foods and drinks, because Switzerland, my God.